Hi there, I'm Amy Griffiths and I'm one of the journalists in Manx Radio's newsroom. And on this episode of Newscast, I've been finding out about the North Barrule aircraft disaster, which happened on the 23rd of April 1945. To mark its 80th anniversary, I've been speaking to Ivor Ramsden from the Manx Aviation and Military Museum, and then Don Madar, who's come all the way to the island from Pennsylvania in the United States to honour his great-uncle, who was one of the 31 men to die that day.
Been planned for a long time. There were actually, about 20 of them were going to come over in 2020. But, of course, COVID took hold and everything was cancelled. So it's taken another, I thought it was worth waiting another few years until we get to the exact 80th anniversary. And then these people came over. There's only 4 of them come over from the States, and a young couple from Northern Ireland who are related to one of the chaps. So they're all relatives of one victim, Andrew Piter. He's one of the 31 who was killed.
And just tell me a bit more about what exactly happened on that day 80 years ago.
Okay, well, it was the end of the war in Europe was almost upon them, and things were starting to relax a little bit. So on the American airfield, or American Air Force airfield down in the south of England, there was chance for some of the ground crew people, the people who didn't normally fly but repaired the aircraft, they were given the opportunity to fly over to Northern Ireland for a few days rest and recuperation, if you like, a few days holiday. So 31 people altogether crammed into a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber. Normally used to drop bombs on the enemy, certainly not a passenger plane. These guys were crammed in to every available space. They took off early in the morning, about 8 o'clock, heading for Northern Ireland. And for some reason, they were flying fairly low over the north of the island. And the cloud was rather low as well. They must have been flying through the cloud. And an eyewitness watched the aeroplane fly over Mackle in the direction of North Barrule. It disappeared into the cloud, and then there was an explosion, and he realised that the aircraft had flown into the side of the hill. He went up there, and obviously there were no survivors. The aircraft was absolutely smashed to bits. All 31 were killed. So it was certainly the worst aircraft accident that's ever happened on the Isle of Man. Hopefully it'll always remain that way. So over the years, we've been in contact with various members of the families of some of the victims, not all of them by any means. But one particular guy, Don Madar, who lives in America, the nephew of one of the victims, he has done a lot of research over there, and he was determined to come along with other members of the family to visit the crash site, and they've actually made it at last, which is rather good. And I've got to say, these people are very excited at the thought of going up North Barrule.
And it must be quite a bittersweet moment for them to be able to go up to see the site for themselves of where it all happened.
Absolutely. I've talking to Don yesterday, and he said there's going to be a lot of tears, and I'm sure there will be. I'll probably join them because, with all the research I've done, you get to know the individual victims in a way. You see pictures of them, you read a bit about their life story, and they were just ordinary young people. They were between about 20 and 25 years old for the most part. All the lives in front of them. They weren't combat people, there wasn't any chance of them being shot or anything like that. But then they died in a fairly difficult to explain accident, in an airplane accident.
And what kind of impact would that have had on the community at the time as well, something like that happening?
Not very much on the Isle of Man, because these things were kept fairly secret. It certainly wouldn't have been in the local paper. There were so many crashes on the island during the war, and it was only in the early days of the war when they were actually reported in the newspaper. After that, it was, as a sort of propaganda thing. I don't know that it was hushed up, but it was just dealt with without a great fanfare. It was one of those sad facts of life that when you've got a lot of aeroplanes flying around the Isle of Man, some of them are going to crash and lives will be lost. Certainly, I've been back home in the States. People were were aware that the end of the war in Europe was imminent, and they were expecting their boys to come home. And sadly, for 31 of them, that didn't happen.
So tell me a little bit more about what it is that you're going to be doing with the relatives and how you're hoping to be able to mark the anniversary with them.
Okay, well, every year people from the Aviation Military Museum go up the mountain to fly the American flag to mark the anniversary of the crash. So tomorrow we're going up there. We'll be there around about 10:15. The aircraft actually crashed about 10:25 in the morning. So we'll be there at the actual time that it crashed. The Americans are going to raise the flag in honor of their compatriots. There won't be any religious service as such. I'm sure some people will want to just say a few words, and that's fine. It's very much a personal event. It's not a sort of a fully organised event. I think one or two other people may well turn up there as well. There usually are people appearing there on the anniversary to pay the respects. And the site itself, it's a lovely, lovely place. It's so peaceful. You can just hear the wind, the birds, and a few sheep in the background. It really is a peaceful place. And to say that 80 years ago, it was just literally a scene of carnage. There's not really a trace of it now. There are small bits of the aeroplane still littered among the rocks, but all the main bits have gone. But it's a very atmospheric place, and to see the American flag, most of us think of America as being a bit of a sad place to be at the moment, but it's a proud moment to fly that flag in honour of those people.
And for the relatives coming over then, is this their first time coming to the island and seeing the site?
It is, yeah. Oh no, one of them has been before. He came I think it was about 20 years ago, and went up there. And he's on his return journey. But for the others, it's a first time, and it may not be the last. I don't know. I showed them around the south of the island yesterday, and they were absolutely stunned by the place.
And for you, as part of the Aviation Museum, why do you think it's such an important thing to mark every year, and then for this year, particularly on its 80th anniversary, to do this to remember those men?
Well, down at the museum, we try to commemorate all the lives that were lost, and not the lives that were lost, just people who served the country in wartime, and also civil aviators. Quite a number have died on the island in accidents. We don't want them to be forgotten, but particularly the wartime guys who were here, not through choice, they had to be here generally. And the North Barrule crash being the worst one, many years ago, we decided that was one that should be commemorated, and we have a memorial actually on the crash site, but it is dedicated mainly to those 31 people, but it does also refer to the others who were killed in aviation accidents on the island's hills.
So is this your first visit here?
It is. It is our, the four of us came, the three of us first visit, and my cousin David, this is his second trip. He came the first time in 2005. We are in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and our uncle was from southwestern Pennsylvania.
Wow. And so what are your first impressions of the Isle of Man so far then?
Stunning. Like people say, it's a little swatch of the entire UK. We're just totally blown away by its beauty and its people.
And you've obviously travelled a really long way to get here today. So tell me about your uncle and why this was something that you really, really wanted to do to remember him.
Well, I started researching him back in 2003. He was an only son. He had 5 sisters. So it was a real tragedy for his immediate parents and the rest of his family. And it sort of carried on to generations that followed. We looked up to him as a real hero. And I started researching in 2003, published a book in 2017 after a lot of digging. Not only about Andy, but about the guys that traveled with him and his friends on the ground at Ridgewell Air Base in Essex. And we sort of set a goal of trying to come over and commemorate him in 75, and the coronavirus put a stop to that. And God willing, here we are for the 80th, and we're standing truly on the mountain at 10:35 this morning when the plane came to rest, killing all 31 aboard. So quite humbling and quite emotional.
I was going to say, how are you feeling standing there as you are at the moment?
It truly makes you realize your humanity and how 31 innocent lives they had served for 2 years on the ground on an air base, protecting liberty, and their life came to such a tragic end.
And that's the thing, because the war was coming to an end. They were going on what should have been a lovely few days off and a bit of a thank you for all of the work that you've done. And for it to end in the way it did seems just painfully unfair.
Yeah, it's funny. I brought Andy and his good friend Ernie Bain, who was from his family was from Northern Ireland in Derry. And 4 weeks before this incident, he and Ernie traveled 18 hours one way from the airfield in Essex to Ernie's family in Derry. So he would have traversed the pattern we think up through Liverpool and across the sea, probably catching a ferry on the other side to get to Northern Ireland. And 4 weeks later, he crashes in this very spot. When you think of his young life, and the fact that his experience brought us here, we would have never come to the Isle of Man. It's just truly humbling.
So tell me what you know about Andy then, and who he was as a person.
Well, Andy was he was sick as a child. I think he ended up contracting some fever, and his sisters rallied around him, and he grew to be a strong man. He ended up going into the coal mines, working with his father, who was our great-grandparents were Slovak immigrants. He worked in a mine before the call to duty in 1942 in August came true. He went and signed up at a local theater. His father really didn't want him to go, being an only son, and he felt obligated.
So in that sense, losing him would have had a massive impact on the family then.
Oh, my goodness. Well, a little of our story, my brother and I, is, we grew up with this painting of Andy on the wall in my grandmother's house. And Andy, through his money that he earned in the service, actually bought the house that we grew up in with his service pay for his parents. So when my parents were married in the early 60s, the five sisters agreed to sell the house to them. And my brother and I grew up in Andy's house. And my parents still live there today. So it's truly an 80-year mark across the board.
And it's just proof as well that a life can end, but it doesn't really stop. It's as long as everyone still remembers them and cherishes their memory in the way that your family clearly has. They're always still here, aren't they?
So true. So true. I really feel spiritually that he's guided me to so many interesting people and interesting places. And, he's been gone for such a long time. So I do feel a spiritual connection to him. And certainly so this morning as we look out across to the Irish Sea.
And in terms of a resting place for him and where his life ended, there are probably fewer spots in the world that are as beautiful in some ways, aren't there?
Oh, without question. You look at the immensity of this hillside, and there was nothing that was going to get through it. Pictures do not justify it. Seeing the rocky heights here is just. But I really have to throw out to Mike Corlett and to Ivor Ramsden. These two gentlemen are gemstones on the island. For those of the islanders that aren't aware of these two, they certainly, excuse me, I'm getting a little choked up. They certainly deserve a huge recognition. Mike in 1995 brought this pole. I can't imagine how he carried equipment to this height and planted a flagpole, and this flag has been flying for these guys since 1995. it's mind-boggling that there's such a piece of history here that is somewhat known, but probably not as well known as it should be. And Ivor over at the museum there, the Manx Aviation Military Museum, he is just, he brings life to a soldier. And that's what attached me to him years ago when I met him over the miles. Both he and Steve Poole, who also used to be an island. Steve wrote a book about crashes on the island. Those two gentlemen bonded with me 10 years ago. And so it's quite humbling to be standing here looking up at North Barrule. I'm speechless when it comes to the view that we're taking in this morning.
And how does it feel knowing that your Uncle Andy and all of his, fellow military men are honoured every year on the Isle of Man, every single year that there is a memorial for them and people stop to think about them and remember them? How does that make you feel?
Well, I can tell you, Andy's three sisters, when I started researching, three of his sisters were still living. And from 03 to 06, this story came back home, and they were able to indulge in it, take it in, and realize that their brother will be forever remembered. And Mike and Ivor have made that possible, along with a number of other people, like the gentleman that drove the four-wheelers. We're standing up right. They drove pretty much to the flag this morning. It's just amazing. And to the citizens who've allowed us to travel on their property to get here. I don't know what else to say other than our hearts go out to the people of the Isle, and words are not enough.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio Newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.